Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. So, I wanted to speak a little bit about foundation of everything that I teach, which is non-duality, which is no compromise. And I wanted to say at the very beginning of the talk that I've been convinced since I started teaching in 1986 that putting your own desire for liberation, for enlightenment, first and foremost on your agenda is going to make your eventual awakening, your eventual liberation inevitable. This is what I believe to be true. I can't guarantee that it is true, and I can't prove it to you, but it's my deepest conviction that it's actually true because I noticed that for a lot of people, the conviction in self and the conviction in spirit, the experience of the conviction in oneself and the experience of the conviction in spirit, which means I have what it takes to do this. I really do. And also, spirit is actually available for me. This kind of conviction in most people doesn't last very long. Sometimes it lasts for a few minutes, for a few hours, a few days, a few weeks. For some people, longer. So it's my belief, I can't prove this, is that the reason why more people fail than succeed is because they give up on themselves, and they give up on spirit also, even without even knowing it. This is one of those endeavors in life, like anything else, that's hard and difficult and ultimately challenging. One has to really give oneself to it wholeheartedly. I used to want to be a jazz musician, and I know that some of the greatest musicians that I've spoken to talked how hard it was to become a good musician, how daunting the living the jazz life actually is or was. And they would say things like, if you really want to do this, you have to have no plan B, which I found very intriguing. He said, if you really want to do this, you have to have no plan B. And with enlightenment, which is one of the most challenging goals I think that actually exists, I believe, this is my personal belief, that if you want to succeed, you want to attain enlightened awareness with some degree of stabilization, then you have to really have no plan B. It has to be a kind of do or die attitude, orientation. And it's that do or die attitude or orientation, which, as I was saying, for most people doesn't last so long. A lot of people feel inspired. In other words, they feel, like I was saying, that they suddenly realize that they can do it, that they have the capacity to awaken, that they believe in themselves, that they can do this, which is a big deal. And believe in the fact that spirit, whatever spirit is available, is near at hand. So we need to approach this in such a way in which we feel. In other words, I think that in order to sustain this kind of intimate relationship with the potential for our own liberation, we have to be very one-pointed about it. And that's why I've always been considered to be a very radical character, a very radical or extreme teacher, principally because of this belief that I've had all along. And if you want this, that if you're serious about wanting to be free, inwardly free, spiritually awakened, spiritually enlightened person, to awaken to the depth of spiritual awakened consciousness, that you have to really want it badly. It's not something that can be a hobby. It just doesn't work that way. Most of us come from postmodern cultural contexts, but in traditional societies, this was understood, and that was why those who are most serious would usually leave popular culture, ordinary culture, and enter into a spiritual culture, enter into a monastery or go to a temple, leave the world behind and go seek for a teacher. Let the world go to hell. Let the world and everyone in it go to hell and just devote oneself to the goal at hand. So there's an absoluteness to this endeavor. There's an absoluteness of solitariness. One has to become a stoic in a sense. There's a degree of stoicism in the clarity of one's own intention to succeed in this that one has to embrace. One has to be very resolute about it. I think if we can do this, half the battle is won. I know in my own case, I definitely had no plan B from when I was 22 years old. I'm 69 now. When I was 22, I had no plan B. So I had no other plan. I had no other plans except to get enlightened. And once I made the transition from being an ordinary person to someone who was taking enlightenment seriously, I realized how alone I was. But I didn't meet very many people who wanted it as badly as I did, or who took their own potential for liberation as seriously as I was taking it. So even though this is a big theme in my teaching, I know always when I teach, I just wanted to focus a little bit on this tonight. And I want all of you to consider that in the end, this is really up to you, how badly you want it. I don't think God has favorites. I don't think there are merely lucky ones and unlucky ones. There are those who, for whatever karmic reasons, are more resolute, want it more badly than others. But I don't think God has favorites. So in a sense, we could say, looking at this from a certain perspective, the outcome of your own spiritual aspirations, the ultimate outcome of your own spiritual aspirations, is not dependent upon what spirit or what God wants, but it's dependent upon you, how badly you want this. And I would lovingly encourage all of you to take this simple point, which I often bring up very seriously, and to look at yourself in this endeavor, to look at the degree of your own earnestness, the degree of your own sincerity, or lack of it. Where do you really stand in relationship to your own potential for liberation? How seriously do you take yourself? How much do you believe in yourself, and how much do you believe that this is possible for you? When people believe in themselves and they believe that when they're inspired and they, as a result of the inspiration, feel the presence of spirit and its miraculous nature near at hand, that individual is inevitably spiritually turned on. They're excited. They're awake to the imminence of the possible. It's always very uplifting and spiritually rewarding to be around someone who's turned on to their own potential for liberation and feels connected to their own potential for liberation. So that's when we really turned on to life. Turned on to life, turned on to human potential, turned on to the miracle that's at the heart of existence itself. We're much more in touch with it. When we're more in touch with it, we feel much more alive, awake. We don't just feel like victims of destiny, dreary victims of destiny and circumstances and karma, not knowing who we are, not knowing why we're here. So this is one very foundational aspect of the teaching. I speak about it all the time. I can't seem to speak about it enough. I never get bored of speaking about this point, which is the foundation of everything that I teach. But I can't encourage you to take it more seriously. Or I can encourage you to take it more seriously. And this relates to a deeper point or a deeper issue here, which has to do with the nature of spirit itself. So when I met my guru, I've told this story many times. So forgive me if you heard it before, but when I met my guru, I asked him, how much effort did you have to make if you want to be free? And he said, you don't have to make any effort, Andrew, to be free. And I didn't know what he was talking about. But then after a few seconds, I saw in the eye of my mind water flowing down the side of a mountain. And I realized that my true nature was like water, ever unobstructed. I realized that my true nature was like water, ever unobstructed and always free. And in that moment, I realized that unenlightenment was merely a thought, which meant that my true nature was inherently self-liberated, always already. And this was a profound realization. And I'm sure many of you have heard other teachers, spiritual masters, say that liberation or enlightenment is our natural state. It's already there. Of course, and of course, from the perspective of feeling unenlightened at any particular time, it's kind of hard to believe. How could we already be enlightened if we don't feel like it? If we feel bored and dull, and trapped in emotions and thoughts, suffering, grief, and fear? How could we already be enlightened? So, but what these great realizers have said about our true nature is actually true. That at the deepest level of the self, our true nature, your true nature, what Ramana Maharshi called the self, the I am, which is the foundation of our feeling of existence, feeling of being. It's the source of the feeling of I. It's deep. That's deeper than any other sense of self. Is ever present in our experience and is always liberated. And when we get distracted from our ego and from the fears and desires of the small self and our ego, for whatever reason, whether it's because we're meditating, having a particularly powerful meditation in the mind, push from the foreground into the background, or we're sitting in the presence of an enlightened person. For whatever reason, the ego is temporarily transcended. Whenever the ego gets transcended, our awareness of the felt presence of our true self comes from the background into the foreground. We suddenly feel free, feel the limitless presence of eternity, either with great intensity or mild intensity, it doesn't matter. But it's always there. And the wanting to be free more than anything else really has to do with focusing our attention on the inherent nature of our true self that's already there. Doesn't need to be changed in any way, it just needs to be discovered, realized, recognized, and focused upon. In spiritual practice, for example, the practice of meditation, with those people who know how to meditate, is simply focusing our attention on the inherently already liberated nature of our true self already. The depth of meditation is simply abiding in the true self. It's already liberated. It's the source of your being. It's very simple, easy, and direct, and natural if you know how to do it and you know what it is. So what I wanted to say was that if it's true, in other words, a big challenge for a lot of us and for a lot of people is living our own deepest insights. A lot of people have glimpses into absolute reality, in the infinite depth of their true self. But they don't let these glimpses don't last very long, and people tend to fall back into the small self and the mind of the small self. and don't feel access anymore. So one of the challenges of awakening to enlightened awareness, as an expression of kind of mature spiritual practice, is learning how to be true to our own deepest insights about the ultimate nature of reality. So, for example, when I met my guru, after 10 minutes, he delivered miraculously an insight to me about the ultimate nature of the inherently liberated nature of my true self, which became tangible and obvious to me, completely obvious. But at the deepest level of the self, I'd always been free, and that shockingly, unfreedom or unenlightenment was only a thought. But unfreedom or unenlightenment was only a thought in my mind. Wow. So one of the other things that my guru said to me that was very impactful, well, he said to me, Andrew, samsara, ignorance, nirvana, enlightenment are one and the same. And you know that you'll be free. So one of the challenges of our enlightenment, one of the challenges of our liberation, one of the challenges of our depth of spiritual attainment has to do with how consistent is our awareness of the truth of who we really are, no matter what our experience appears to be. How awake to the truth of the non-dual or inherently liberated nature of our true self do we remain, even in the face of the ego's ups and downs, experiences of fear and ignorance and egotism and pain, and suffering and desire. Are we able to remain unwavering in the depth of our clarity of self-knowledge, of the knowledge of the truth of who we really are, even in the face of the temptation to doubt it? If you've had a bad day, a bad month, a bad year, if you've had a terrifying experience or a painful experience or a disappointing experience or a shocking experience, are you able to remain steady in the face of egoic grief, or disappointment, or anger, or rage, or frustration, or confusion? Or do we get lost in the dream, which is the story of the small self? Once again, do we get trapped there? So a lot of these breakthrough experiences we have, which should reveal the ultimate truth to us, and when that happens, we know that it happened. A lot of us don't have the spiritual discipline, or are not practicing the degree of deep spiritual surrender that enables us not to lose contact with this depth and clarity at moments when we need it the most. So another expression of not compromising means that when you have seen the truth, not just when you see the truth, when you have seen the truth, when you have known the truth, and you know that you've known it, are you able to remain true to it, even when samsara, the relative world of the small self, time, space, world, universe, is distracting your attention, seems to be obscuring your presence of this deeper non-dual reality. So if you're seeking to become an enlightened person, someone who's stabilized in your access to enlightened awareness, you also have to become stoic. You have to be stoic. You have to be one-pointed. And you have to, at a certain point, decide, is your allegiance going to be to the fears and desires of your small self, or to your culturally conditioned small self? Or will it be to the deeper non-dual dimension of reality that is always inherently free and inherently liberated? And this takes not just spontaneous awareness, it also takes spiritual self-discipline, surrender, trust, faith, surrender, trust, and faith, surrender, trust, and faith, never to doubt what you already know to be true, even in the face of fear and difficult emotions. My guru told me that the only difference between enlightenment and unenlightenment is doubt. It took me a long time to really understand what he meant. So these deeper experiences can show us the truth. But if these deeper experiences are going to liberate us, we have to know how to be true to the truth that we realize. And that takes a lot of courage to be true to the truth in the face of the all too human temptation to doubt. But the reason why a lot of people who have high and deep experiences fall down from those experiences is because they haven't had the courage to resist the temptation to doubt. And the true test of our awakening or the test of our enlightenment is when we're tempted to doubt and we resist, we refuse, and we remain utterly wedded to and attached to and surrendered to our these the deeper knowledge of reality that we've had in our deepest moments. So if we want to look at the context, the meaning of not compromising in this context, it means these two things I'm trying to clarify, which is the intention for liberation. But the intention for liberation, at least in the way that I teach it, I believe this is my personal conviction, must eventually become radical and one-pointed and all-consuming. And in addition to that, we need to be able to not compromise our own deepest insights about the ultimate nature of the real. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of commitment. And the thing is, if you do this the right way, if you have no plan B, if you have no plan B, then you give yourself another option but to surrender. Non-duality means not two. It's non-duality, which means not two, is interpreted in many different ways by different teachers, different traditions. But in this context in which I'm speaking about it now, not two means we always only have one option. That's how I understand this meaning of not two for the relative context of being a human who believes they actually have choices. It means I don't have any choice anymore. I only have one option because I've surrendered already to the absolute, to the truth of who I really always am, beyond the vicissitudes and the confusion of the mind and ego. Because I've already said, not my will, but thy will be done. Once and for all and forever, I don't have a choice anymore. I'm yours. Do with me what you will. And at that point, it really, at this point, it becomes locked in. It becomes, your soul begins to shift. Now you become a realizer because your soul now is grounded in this absolute non-dual dimension of reality, dimension of life. You become the real thing because you have stepped beyond the small self, below the small self, into the deepest part of yourself, which is now where you become your new home. So now yourself is grounded in that which is absolute. Now you're on safe ground. That's what the Buddha meant by reaching the yonder shore. But for that to happen, you have to really want it. And you have to be finished At least this is my belief, this is my understanding. Yeah, well, one has to be finished with any other possibility in life. You still believe that you can find deep and soul liberating happiness somewhere else in your own true self. You'll never make it. You have to have no doubt that there's only one way that this could work, which means going all the way. That's it. This is the radical nature of my approach to this. It's not my radical approach to this is not original by any stretch of the imagination, but it is rare in the world today. This is why when I'm teaching meditation on Saturdays, I'm always using the metaphor of jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. So the intention has to be, I want to go home, my true self, and I never want to return back to samsara, to the world of ignorance and pain, and fear and delusion, which, when you get trapped there, you could be trapped there for lifetimes or eternity. When you really begin to wake up at the level of consciousness, these kinds of words come alive. Because you can feel their tangible, the truthfulness that they're speaking from. Because you realize that in an instant, you can fall back into delusion, into the world of time, and history, and the narrative of the small self, and lose touch with the presence of the infinite, which is where we always find liberation in the present moment. And once we lose touch, we start believing again in our delusion, in our deluded thinking, our deluded beliefs, the delusion of the mind. It's very difficult to get back to where we were. It's so easy to wake up, and it's so hard to wake. It's easy to wake up, but it's much harder to stay awake for these reasons. So these two issues that I'm circling around this evening is the cultivation of an attitude of no compromise, which is very challenging for most people, which is very challenging. Because most people come to the spiritual life already karmically deeply entrenched in all kinds of circumstances and obligations and responsibilities. So wanting to be free, wanting to be free more than anything else when you're a very busy person with all kinds of obligations and responsibilities is a bit of a tall order. But it is what it is. I didn't make up the rules. I just discovered them. Because you remember the idea here in relationship to the freedom we're speaking about is not just an experience of inner freedom at a level of feeling and knowing, but it's most importantly, it's the discovery of a completely different context for existence. It's the discovery of a living, vibrating, tangible, liberated context for your existence. It's the discovery of a completely different world space. The world space, the new world space is the different context. And you can't bring samsara with you in a suitcase. And what makes nirvana such an extraordinary and miraculous, indescribable heaven realm is because you can't take samsara there. You can't take your samsaric suitcase with you. To abide in nirvana with any kind of consistency requires that we leave samsara behind. And I know this sounds very absolute, and it is. But I didn't make up the rules, I just discovered them. Doing this for real, or the real thing is very radical. It always has been. That's not a new idea. Awakening to the radical nature of awakening to spirit uncompromised. It's not a new idea. But because most of us come from a cultural context, cultural environment that's so samsaric, that's so materialistic, that's so uninformed by these deeper dimensions of reality that what I'm saying sounds crazy. And I realize to our unliberated small self what I'm saying does sound crazy. But from my point of view, for what it's worth, resisting the absolute truth on its own terms is even more crazy. So you see there's a predicament we have to deal with, which is the difference between enlightenment and unenlightenment, between truth and falsehood, between clarity and ignorance, between liberation and bondage. It is what it is. It's an absolute dilemma when you look at it on its own terms. And it makes the ego very uncomfortable. The ego starts feeling like it's getting suffocated, which by the way is the whole idea. And if you want to be free more than anything else, you want liberation on its own terms. Suffocating the ego now and then is not a bad idea. When I met my guru, my experience was so intense that on the level of pure feeling and knowing, I felt that I was either going to die or I was going to become liberated. What was happening was so powerful, so overwhelming, so all-encompassing. Either I knew I was not going to survive. Whether it meant I was going to die, I was going to become liberated, I wasn't sure. But the spiritual path lived in earnest is not without risk. So to repeat the two dimensions of all this that I want to remind you of, that I always speak about, that are necessary in order to succeed, is to, if you're willing to embrace an attitude of no compromise as much as possible in your relationship to your own potential for liberation in this life, number one. Number two, your fundamental spiritual practice should be compelling yourself to live up to your deepest realization. Whether that realization is apparent to you or not, even if you're working from memory, it doesn't matter. You want to live up to what you realize the ultimate truth to be in your own deepest experiences of the truth. Because when you see the truth, when you awaken to the truth, the absolute truth, and you know it, and when you lose touch with the vision, then you have to make the effort to be true to what you knew to be true, even if it doesn't feel available to you. Whether it's available to you at a level of feeling and knowing doesn't matter. What's important is that you've seen it. Once you've seen it, then you know it. If you know it, then then the idea is you have to act like you know it. And the way you act like you know it is by living up to it. And that's the hard part. Having experiences is easy. Living up to what we realize in these experiences is something else altogether. But that's what separates the men from the boys or the women from the girls. Some of us are deadly serious about this, some of us are not that serious yet. But when you're very serious about this, you realize when you get into it, there is a life and death quality about our own potential for emancipation that we begin to feel vibrating in our souls. We realize this is a life and death matter, which has to do with the evolution of the soul. And if I don't take it seriously, I'm going to die into the same level of ignorance in which I've lived my life. And that would be the tragedy. So there's seeing the truth and knowing the truth directly, and then there's the matter of living up to it. Seeing the truth and feeling the truth directly is easy. It doesn't take any effort when it happens. Living up to it in the midst of all of our ignorance and confusion, ambivalence and doubt and inertia is something else altogether. These days we hear about there's some people who are very infatuated with the path to liberation, pursued with psychedelic drugs. Some people have taken some of these extraordinary substances. They take them over and over and over and over and over again. Why are you doing it? If in the first few times you haven't seen what you need to see, you should leave it. If you've seen what you need to see, then you have to live up to it. Just pursuing more visions will not liberate you. It'll just make your soul weak. Once we've seen what we need to see, once the vision has been revealed to us, then we have to begin doing the hard work, which is the living up to it. Living up to the reality of the unseen, the materialistic world. Takes a lot of courage and audacity. So when the master said to me, when the master revealed to me that unenlightenment was only a thought, I recognized the truth of it, but I didn't even understand it with my mind. I saw it being absolutely true because of the state of consciousness that I was in his presence. It took me a while to understand intellectually what it actually meant. And I've spent the last almost 40 years doing my best to live up to what that means. Sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing, but never giving up, 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 never doubting, never giving up. And if you can do that, if you can never doubt and never give up and never doubt and never give up and never doubt and never give up, never doubt and never give up and always lean into the very edge of your own potential, the revelation will never be far away. It'll always reawaken. Maybe even more brightly than it did before. You can tell if someone's enlightened when they speak about their own consciousness. Most of the time they're speaking about the present moment. Because the truth of enlightened awareness doesn't live in time. Therefore it doesn't live in the past. It can only exist in the eternal present. And that's what we never want to lose access to. But in order not to lose access, we have to embrace more and more of an uncompromising attitude, intention, and relationship to life. Remember, there's relative values and absolute values. The individual ego and the culturally conditioned ego are usually wrapped up in relative values. But your true self, and what I call the authentic self, are inspired by absolute values, vibrate with absolute values. So it's a different world. That's why we need to stay busy with this, with all of our hearts, so we don't lose touch with the absolute nature of all this. We waste more time in delusion and ignorance and enlightenment. Even though enlightenment is only a thought, it can be an incredibly powerful, obscuring thought, obscuring of the true self. So when you really wake up and you stay awake, you never doubt your enlightenment. You never doubt your enlightenment. No matter what your experience appears to be, no matter what your experience appears to be, because you know that a cloudy sky or a rocky sea cannot obscure the depths that lay underneath it, of the sun is always shining. That's why we have to remain steady and unwavering and absolutely committed and uncompromising. And if you embrace an uncompromising relationship to your own liberation and to life itself, your life will look like a spiritual life powerfully expressed. If you embrace a uncompromising attitude and uncompromising position in relationship to life, the human experience, and your own life and your own human experience, in relationship to the choices you make and the actions you take, it'll become obvious that you're not an ordinary person anymore, that you're living according to different rules than everyone else. You're not a slave to the individual and collective mind anymore. It's spirit itself to which you've surrendered. You surrender to an absolute spiritual power. It's the source of your liberation and your spiritual self-confidence. So when you stop compromising, your life will change automatically. Everybody's going to know it. As you begin to live, you're living now according to different rules and regulations, different values, different aspirations. You won't fit in anymore. You won't fit in anymore. You might lose a few friends. You might gain some new ones also. If you stop compromising, you become like a vortex. You become like a vortex or a magnet. You stop moving here, there, and everywhere, but now you become still, deep within. Anyway, I think I shared everything that I intended to share with all of you tonight, or at least this tonight where I am. A life of no compromise can take you all the way home. This is sure. Embracing the truth that nirvana and samsara are one and not two takes time. Because this truth is not so obvious. Something I realized very powerfully about a month ago when I was teaching here with all of you is that something I've realized before is that in the end, all this enlightenment business is only about becoming more human, more fully human. In the end, that's all we're trying to do here is to become more fully and completely human. In the most beautiful sense of what that means. But we have so far to go in order to do that. And so a lot of these esoteric Dharma teachings, like a life of no compromise, and learning how to embrace the significance of non-duality in the context of our flawed humanity, in the end will only enable us to become more fully human, to become more fully and beautifully human, to realize our full potential as evolving souls, in this case including the deepest dimension of reality in our evolving humanity. So now we become a awakened human who's conscious of the interior dimension of reality and the source of the existence itself. That's all it's about. So it sounds very esoteric, a lot of these teachings. But in the end, it's always about how can we become more fully human or most fully human in all the most beautiful ways it could mean. That's really what this is all about. It's possible for all of us to become very beautiful. But in order for that to happen, in the transcendental context, you have to make a great sacrifice. And that sacrifice is the delusion of the small self, of the separate self. And there probably has been lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes of pain and suffering, ignorance and delusion, and attachment and karma. Gotta let it all go. In order to become truly beautiful, we have to let it all go. In order to become truly beautiful, we have to let it all go. And the small self is so afraid of such a leap. But a sign of a sign of your own emergent spiritual maturity is that as you may be afraid, you become more attracted to what's possible than you are afraid of it. So if you feel yourself more attracted by what's possible than you are afraid of it, it's a sign that you're doing well, you're on the right track, you should keep going forward. I think that becoming more fully human would be one of our greatest values. It's important, no? Because eventually we want to do this for each other. We want to do it for the universe. We want to do it for our maker. Become beautiful. We all have so much potential. Okay, I'm going to stop now talking. Take a break for 2 minutes. Okay, if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer your questions if you have any.
Yeah. So if you have a question, please write your question in the chat box. And Andrew, Adam is saying, I always ask a question, but this time I wanted to tell a quick story related to what you said, if I may.
A good story.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's a good story. Yeah, I heard that as a Native American story. It's about a guy, he goes up to his Indian chief or teacher and he says, how can I know about God? And his Indian teacher takes him to a pond of water, and he dunks his head under the water, and he brings it back up, and the guy he's gasping for breath, and he does this several times, and every time he brings his head above the water, he keeps on gasping for breath. And then his teacher says to him, when your desire for God is as great as your desire to breathe, then maybe you know something about God. And related to what you said, I could see that in my own experience is that I have desires for other things of this world. You know, I need to satisfy my physiological needs, my emotional needs. That is legitimate, but nothing has to be greater. I mean, what's greater than all of that is my desire for God to help me to quench my thirst for him, because that's ultimately what's going to set me free, because nothing else of this world is going to do it, but ultimately satisfying that my thirst, my hunger, for the divine, for knowing who I really am, and until that's satisfied, I'm always going to suffer.
Yeah, I've heard that story before.
Yeah.
I think Ramana Maharshi said that a true seeker needs to want liberation the way a drowning man wants air.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the one thing I would just want to mention is the thing really resonated very strongly with me about what you said about doubt. So it's like, it seems like the problem is, how is it that I can become enlightened? But that's not the problem. The problem is realizing that I am enlightened. So what is that is preventing me is doubt, like you said, in one word.
Yeah, but you can't just accept that you're already enlightened with your intellect. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I know that the great modern realizer Adida would tell his students that they had to give up the seeking. But I don't think and my understanding that we can only stop seeking when we find what we're looking for.
Uh-huh.
So even though technically I think Adida wasn't wrong, I don't think that's great advice for spiritual seekers, because the point is, as Jesus says, seek until you find. So if we seek and seek and seek, and if we're truly earnest and sincere and desperate and committed and uncompromising, sooner or later we are going to see the goal. We will awaken to enlightened awareness, even if it's brief. Doesn't matter even if it only lasts for a few seconds, but we're going to know that we found it, or it has found us. We say, oh, no, I know I found it, and I know it's found me. When it happens, you don't have any doubt about it. So then, and only, I believe, after we've found what we were looking for, not as a permanent attainment necessarily, but as even a glimpse. How can can we stop seeking then? Can we stop seeking then? Most people can't. So most people need another experience, because they even though they've found it, and it has found them, and they found what they're looking for, even if it was briefly, and they know it, their ego's still doubting. So they continue the seeking process till it happens again. And the second time, it's a confirmation of what they already realized, what they already knew was true. So is the second time, is that enough? Do they need more? So usually most people, it's not enough, because they fall back into their unenlightened, or apparently, according to what we said, apparently unenlightened mind once again. Fall back into the trap of believing that they're not already there. So in alignment with what I was saying in my talk, just to follow up on your question, to repeat, I don't think we can stop seeking or should stop seeking until we actually have found what we're looking for. Only then, I believe, can we authentically begin the spiritual practice of ceasing to seek. Because because if our liberation is going to be profound and stable, it has to be based upon a direct cognizance of the infinite nature of consciousness, a direct glimpse or awakening to enlightened awareness itself. And that's when you know that you know. And that means you know that you know that you know that you know. In the knowing, there's a realization of the eternal nature of this kind of knowing. It's a brief vision of the totality of everything that exists and everything that doesn't exist. It's seeing everything. And once you know it, then you can say, okay, now do I believe that I've seen this? And the person says yes. And you say, well, then why don't you let go? And that's when they see the quandary that they're in, a predicament is that the ego doesn't want to let go, because the ego doesn't want to give up control of the vehicle. The body, mind, and personality is the vehicle. The ego doesn't want to give up control, doesn't want to give up dominion over the body, mind, and personality. The ego wants power, it doesn't want to die. So then the individual has to work that out. To which they usually have to seek the guidance of somebody who has done these things and help them. But seek until you find. When you find, then expect yourself to do the noble thing, which is to let go of the ego and let go of the seeking. Because you see, if the ego is going to let go of the seeking, it has to let go of the whole game that it's playing all the time. Which is that there's a fundamental problem that has to be solved. If you give up the seeking, there's no fundamental problem that has to be solved anymore. But the ego finds that unbearable because it doesn't exist in that growth space. It's gone. It's disappeared. It wants to be center of your attention all the time. It wants to exist. Doesn't want to die. So seek until you find. And I think this is a very good teaching because in the teaching of seek until you find, I'm not asking anybody to give up their ignorance until they've seen through it. But once someone has seen through their ignorance and they can tell you exactly how they saw through it and what the difference between truth and falsehood is, they can express it in their own terms. Then they have to be responsible. Will they be responsible for what they've seen? And most people will choose not to be responsible anyway. That's when you start finding how crazy we really are, because they don't want to give up. At least at that point, it's their own refusal. It's not because they can't do it. And that's the tragedy of the small self and its unbelievable powers of persuasion over the weak-minded people. So seek until you find. Once you've found, are we ready to take responsibility for what we found in all our imperfection? Yes or no?
Yes, yeah.
Most people want this to be easy instead of realizing that this is not easy. Even if it's easy sometimes, this is something we all have to fight for. Or most of us have to fight for anyway. But if you're willing to fight for it with all of your heart, because you've given yourself no other choice, then this higher state will become a constant friend, be available to you. But if you're not willing to fight for it, the state will disappear and you won't know what's up or down anymore. And then it all becomes a story about the small self, not about enlightenment. It becomes a story about the small self and its struggles, which is a pretty boring story in the end. The enlightenment story is always exciting, thrilling, and ever new. Ever new, thrilling. Always like the first time. Always profound, miraculous, liberating, and glorious. The ego story is none of those things. So seek until you find, brother.
Okay, thank you very much.
And then when you find, it's not going to be a free ride. Because if God exists, then he or she is going to be watching you. Is he ready to let go now, or does he need more? Or will he insist that I give him more? Will you say, yes, no, I've seen you, I'm utterly grateful. You've shown your true self to me. I'm utterly convinced of who you are, and I give my life to you and you alone. Not my will, but thy will be done. And if that happens, then it's over. Whatever happens after that doesn't really even matter. Because the work is done. It's not even in your hands anymore after that.
That initial step, it's the only choice is mine.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
I'm just saying the initial step, I'm saying the only choice is mine. I'm the one that has to make that choice.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I try and encourage people to do, even though they don't do it, is to be resolute, to try to be resolute about this with themselves. Say, I need to do this. I want to do this. I want to do it now. I don't know what this is going to bring. But I'm ready and willing to find out. I'm ready and willing to make sacrifices. When I let go of my mind in order to take the big leap into the unknown. I'm willing to trust. What my guru called that friend we can never see.
Just another quick question just came in when you were saying that, is that at the same time, I have to do that, but at the same time, if I can't do that, I want to be okay with that. So I have to let go and be okay with letting go. But when I can't let go, I want to have self-compassion and saying, well, that's okay too.
Well, it's okay to be hard on ourselves once in a while.
Yeah.
Once in a while, not every day. But the point is, Adam, the point is that if you do approach this with the kind of sincerity that I'm speaking about, these glimpses will visit you, and they will be so intoxicating and so inspiring that you will begin to believe in your own capacity to actually succeed in doing this. Even if it lasts for 1 second, that's more than enough. 1 second, 1 second of eternity is infinite, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
Yes. Yeah.
So 1 second of eternity is enough to subdue the ignorance of the ego.
Yeah.
Because it's forever.
Mm-hmm.
So if this kind of thing starts happening, you'll start believing in God more than you believe in yourself, small self. And that'll give you what I call spiritual self-confidence.
Yeah.
When you have spiritual self-confidence, you start believing in your own capacity to be an enlightened person. Start taking yourself seriously. Realize enlightenment doesn't really exist. It doesn't only exist in statues of dead people who lived thousands of years ago. It also is a living vibration in consciousness, culture and consciousness now. It's available. It's here. We just have to make ourselves available for it. How does that sound?
That says it all for me. Thank you.
Utterly reasonable, utterly reasonable in all its unreasonableness.
Right. Exactly.
What's the beauty of it?
Yeah.
It's utterly reasonable in its utter unreasonableness.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Makes total sense to me.
Cool.
Thank you.
So the next one is more a comment from Pramod. He's saying, Dear Andrew, thank you for the beautiful experiential teaching today. It felt like being on an inner journey along the talk. The message of how pursuing enlightenment was a journey to becoming more human was both relieving somehow, I don't know why, and naturally attracting to become more. I don't have any question, but I am sharing this to express my gratitude for these teachings and direction at all times.
Thank you. That's very sweet. And the realization that in the end this is about becoming more fully human, I find very important. It brings it back home. And shows how it reveals to us that there is this enormous hidden potential in all of us to become more fully human, but infinitely more fully human. Infinitely more fully human in ways that really matter for all of us. So it's an important realization. It brings it back down to earth. It brings enlightenment back down to earth. Because often when we speak about enlightenment, we like to speak about transcendental dimensions of reality, which is a big part of all this. But in the end, if you realize this is really about becoming more fully human, or liberating our capacity to become more fully human, brings it back to earth in a way that's very visceral and very temporal and very immediate and very important. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
And then there is a question from Patricia. She is saying, so maybe seeking does not equal fighting. And when we realize that we are there, fighting seems to break the flow.
Fighting or finding?
Fighting.
Can you read it again, though, please?
So maybe seeking does not equal fighting. And when we realize that we are there, fighting seems to break the flow.
Well, a big part of seeking, Patricia, is finding the ego.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I've been fighting the ego for decades, and sometimes it's successful and I've actually realized my way through it. And other times my fighting has me doing intellectual acts of, I know this is what I need to do in order to be at point B, so I'm going to do it, but I don't have the comprehensions that it takes to actually move to point B internally. So the fighting seems to bring with it like a lack of flow, whereas when we're seeking with the sincerity of our heart in that beautiful surrendered way, you don't fall into this. It's the fighting. Like, I see myself as somebody with a great deal of courage, but that courage has gotten me into some binds that maybe they're all correct in the end, but they have been tremendously difficult to live through. And yeah, I don't know. I just kind of feel like fighting is maybe something that has us picking up a sword when we're not able to wield that sword or something. You know what I mean?
yeah, maybe it's not the right thing then. Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, my hearing is so bad I didn't understand your sentence.
Sometimes, no, as I've listened to you, I agree with you. Fighting is not always the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, with the enlightenment practice, usually usually involves letting go more than fighting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we're serious, we will let go when the time is right.
I found in the last year that my dependence on the statement, thy will be done, kind of coupled with lead me not into temptation, are, those two statements seem to be the ones that are keeping me in the right mindset of the seeking, that are keeping it more pure than it has been in the past.
There are statements of trust and surrender, no?
Right. Trust and surrender, right. Exactly. Exactly.
So there's two ways to respond to the call of the spirit. One is trust and surrender, as we're discussing. And the other is responding through some kind of affirmative action. So our response to our own realizations, our own insights, should be either trust and surrender, just letting go, or performing some action that takes us that compels us to take a step forward. In the end, the response to the realization is either going to be trust and surrender, or some kind of deliberate activity, action that will compel us to take a step forward, depending on whatever it is.
It's funny. Did you just make that an or situation where it's either trust or surrender or affirmative action?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes trust and surrender means doing nothing but letting go. But the affirmative action means actually getting up and doing something specific in order to respond to the call of the spirit.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because the bind I find myself in is that my wish to take that courageous affirmative action sometimes pushes me off a ledge that I need to be perched on longer, like truly trust and surrender before the action, and I'm not truly at the trust and surrender stage, so that the action becomes false.
Well, it may or may not be true, but as I'm listening to you and also to Adam, there's a similar tendency which a lot of people have, which is at a certain point of our own inner development, how our ego happens to feel about anything at a certain point has to cease to be of primary importance. We want to get to the point where we're not judging how we're doing or what's happening, but how our ego feels about it. For example, Patricia, sometimes doing the wrong thing, sometimes doing the wrong things feels very good, doesn't it? Sometimes doing terrible things can feel very good. And sometimes doing the right things, whatever that may be, can feel terrible. So therefore, when we're talking about dharma and non-duality, in order to keep our eye on the prize, stay focused on the destination, we have to learn how to begin to disidentify with the ego's feelings, and be less concerned with how the ego's feelings. And even if the ego's feeling very precious or sensitive or vulnerable, in terms of our true self, that doesn't matter. We want to begin to have our attention. We want to learn to focus our attention at a deeper and higher space within ourselves, deeper and higher than the ego's feelings and thoughts about anything. And that will help us to become very strong, courageous, spiritual warriors. But a lot of us have learned this habit of constantly saying, how does my ego feel now? How does my ego feel now? How does my ego feel now? Does it feel good? Does it feel bad? Does it feel frightened? Does it feel trusting? If this is about enlightenment and not about psychotherapy, then how the ego feels doesn't matter. And then when you realize that there's a deeper part of yourself that's free from your ego, you'll realize that it actually is true what Andrew's saying. It doesn't matter what the ego feels. It really doesn't matter. You'll realize it in yourself because you feel that there's the inherent spiritual strength and liberated passion in your true self, in your authentic self. You feel it. You awaken to it. You realize how your ego feels doesn't really make any difference. That's when you begin to feel you awaken to your own potential to be a liberated soul, a liberated human being. Because you realize there's a whole different dimension of self inside yourself. And it's free from ego. Literally. And you realize, oh, I see, it doesn't matter how the ego feels. Remember, Patricia, the ego never was interested in enlightenment in the first place. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, and enlightenment as, a form of psychotherapy. I hear what you're saying with that, and still, it's like we do have to battle through our personality and what our emotions are saying to us and all of that, in spite of the fact that there is a higher perspective to look at it from.
That's very well said, very articulate. But I'm sure, even though I don't know you at all, I'm sure you've already done that, haven't you?
I guess so. I guess so. Well, we did meet in India many years ago, 2000.
Where was that?
Rishikesh.
Oh, cool. Did you come to my retreat?
Yeah, I went to a retreat of yours, and it was profound, and it sparked my most profound experience ever. I'm sorry, my battery is low, and I don't feel like cutting out right at a key point of this conversation. So I'm walking to the power. Uh, uh, so yeah, so we did meet, and it sparked one of those gold card moments um, uh, that showed me the truth of oneness, and um, and I was, for the 3 seconds or 2 seconds, who knows how long it lasted, I was like fully aware of all truths. I knew I had the answers to all the questions. I had access to everything just for that split second. And so that was sparked maybe a month after the retreat, while I was walking home from work and was being um, attacked by somebody, actually. And so it was a profound experience that came from shock, a conscious shock. And since then, I've understood that the truth is so much different than what we're living in the regular space, our regular mindset or our regular heart set. So I've just been striving for that ever since, and working to comprehend ever since how to bring myself back into that experience as a permanent state, um, which of course has been highly elusive. So I just wanted to say that. I mean, and I'm grateful for your consistency in your teaching and all of that. Um, Very often I find myself taking the teaching of being courageous in the wrong energy, and like almost bludgeoning myself over the head with my own courage. You know what I mean?
So have I seen you since then?
Yeah, I've been to many retreats.
Well, come again. We have another one this winter in South India. You should come.
Hmm.
Did you know we have a center in South India?
Oh, you just cut out.
We have a center here in South India. Did you know that?
No, I know you've been teaching out of India for a couple of years, because I tune into the meditations and talks, uh, but I haven't really opted to follow a guru, because I feel that the inner guru, the being, is the one whose will needs to be done, and that I keep trying to put my ear on that railroad track, most importantly, and yeah. But I mean, I've been a Gnostic missionary in the interim and all of that, so it's been a journey. I haven't been laying around eating bonbons.
All right, Patricia. Well, thank you. It's been lovely to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I have one more
Okay.
question here from Ananda.
Yes.
my sense is that Great Spirit sometimes reveals to us things from our past to see and address, and without addressing them fully, we will continue to be bound by the same compulsions of the past, even if the compulsions were from kindness and heartbreak. And then we attract the same heartbreak over and over until the feeling body can resolve the overwhelming pain that led to tragedy. This is not about bad karma as much as it is about momentum of energy and unresolved relationships. What is the evolutionary enlightenment response to this?
Makes sense. Makes sense. And in the end, all of these issues are resolved through letting go. In the end. So what you're saying makes sense, but remember that in the end, it's all in terms of the liberation from karma is resolved through letting go in the present moment at a very deep level. So from the perspective of the Dharma, there's nothing that we need to do. We just have to let go. And if we can let go at a profound level, that will liberate us, even if the momentum of the karma is still present. We'll still be liberated in the midst of it. That takes the kind of heroic determination and heroic courage and an audacious spiritual aspiration. But if we're sincere enough, based on everything that I've been saying tonight, we can do it. Because we want to stop looking at the past for excuses for why we can't do anything particular in the present moment. If we're aspiring for liberation.
So you speak of a full letting go. So my felt emotional experience of this was that the original problem happened from like kind of a shattering of too much letting go, and the physical body couldn't handle it. And so the compulsion and the momentum and the recreation of the experience keeps happening.
Well, if it keeps happening, it means you're doing something to make it keep happening.
And maybe it's the letting go that's making it keep happening, because the way that letting go was happening was not dharmic. Maybe I need to find a different kind of letting go.
That could be true. But it's possible to be free in this lifetime if we're sincere about it. If we're committed, yeah, it's very possible.
Yeah, I mean, I had like a week or two ago this experience that it was very strong, that my liberation was tied to this. But like you were saying, that line of death and liberation is very slim. Like it could go either way.
It's the title of my second book is called Freedom Has No History.
So, I think I probably read that in the 90s, but
It's a good book.
yeah, I mean, if Great Spirit brings something into awareness in the present moment and things are poignant and real in the present moment, then that's the moment. And if there's no time, then everything that's ever existed that's real is present here now in some level of depth. And so addressing things directly is possible if everyone is willing.
It's all true, but letting go is the secret juice. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. I very much have enjoyed being with you all tonight. Sending you all much love.